The church bells echoed through the small town, slow and heavy, like the heartbeat of grief itself. The sky hung low with gray clouds, and a light drizzle painted the ground in silver. People stood in black coats, whispering softly, their faces pale and wet with both rain and tears. Margaret stood still near the front row, her hands trembling as she held a white rose. Her eyes were red and swollen from nights without sleep. Before her, inside a polished coffin, lay her only daughter, Elena. The girl who used to laugh so loud the whole house would brighten. The girl who always believed in love. Now, that laughter was gone. And standing over her, Margaret could barely breathe. Her husband had passed away years ago, so this loss felt even heavier. Elena had been everything to her, her comfort, her reason to smile, her world. And now, even the world seemed to have stopped moving. But what made the silence unbearable wasn't just death. It was betrayal. Everyone in town knew that Elena's husband, David, had not come. The man who promised to love her till death had not even come to say goodbye. Instead, rumors said he was seen at the airport that morning, traveling with another woman. Margaret could still hear the whispers behind her. He went to Miami with that woman. Can you imagine? On the day of his wife's funeral. Poor Elena. She never deserved that man. Each word was like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. She wanted to scream. She wanted to curse his name. But all she could do was stare at her daughter's still face, so peaceful, so beautiful, and wonder how life had turned so cruel. The priest began to speak, his voice low and steady. We gather here to say goodbye to our beloved Elena Parker. May her soul find peace, and may her loved ones find strength. Margaret tried to listen, but her mind was elsewhere. Every moment from the past few months replayed like broken film. Elena's tired smile. Her nervous phone calls. The bruises she once tried to hide under long sleeves. Something had been wrong. A mother always knows. But Margaret had been too afraid to ask, too afraid to believe that the man her daughter loved could hurt her. Now she would never know the truth. The rain began to fall harder, tapping against the coffin like soft knocks from another world. Margaret stepped closer and placed the white rose on top. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I'm sorry, my sweet girl. I should have protected you." Just then, a man's voice broke through the sound of rain. She was too good for this world. Margaret turned. It was Ryan, her daughter's co-worker. A young man in his late 20s, nervous and pale, holding an umbrella. "She talked about you a lot," he said gently. She was proud of her mother. Margaret nodded weakly. "Did she ever tell you if something was wrong?" Ryan hesitated. His eyes darted to the crowd, then back to her. "Maybe this isn't the right place. But I think you deserve to know something." Before Margaret could ask, another gust of wind swept through the cemetery, making everyone shiver. The priest signaled for the coffin to be lowered. Margaret's knees went weak as she watched her daughter disappear into the ground. The moment felt unreal, like the world was folding in on itself. The sound of earth falling on wood echoed painfully in her ears. One handful after another. Until finally, silence. People came to hug her, offer condolences, say words that meant nothing. "She's in a better place. You have to be strong." But nothing they said could fill the emptiness inside her. When everyone began to leave, Margaret stood alone by the grave, clutching her purse tightly. Her black dress was soaked, but she didn't care. Her phone buzzed softly in her bag. She ignored it at first. But it buzzed again and again. Finally, she pulled it out. A new message flashed on the screen, from an unknown number. "You don't know the truth about that night." Margaret froze. Her breath caught in her throat as her trembling fingers tapped the screen. No name. Just the message. She looked around the graveyard, her eyes scanning every face, every corner. Everyone seemed to be gone. Only the caretaker remained in the distance, shoveling dirt. The phone buzzed again. Don't trust what they told you. She didn't die the way they said. Her heart started pounding so hard it hurt. Margaret typed back quickly, "Who is this?" No reply. She felt her pulse rising, her mind spinning with questions. Who would send her this? Why now? And what did they mean, she didn't die the way they said? A chill ran down her spine. She remembered the officer who had told her it was a car accident. Instant. Nothing suspicious. But deep down, Margaret had never believed it. Elena was a careful driver. She never sped. She hated driving at night. And yet, the crash had happened past midnight, on an empty road. Margaret stared at the message again, her eyes wide. What if someone had done this to her daughter? The sound of thunder rolled across the sky. She quickly slipped her phone back into her purse, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Just as she turned to leave, she noticed something strange near the grave, half buried in the wet grass, a small silver locket glinting in the rain. Margaret bent down and picked it up. It was Elena's locket, one David had given her years ago on their anniversary. Inside it was supposed to be a picture of them together. But when Margaret opened it, she gasped. The picture inside was torn in half. Only Elena's face remained. The other side, where David's picture should have been, was ripped away. Her heart dropped. Who would have done that? She looked around the cemetery again. The air felt heavy, almost alive. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out, a sharp, cold sound that echoed in the rain. Margaret closed the locket and put it in her pocket. She didn't know what was happening, but something inside her shifted that moment. Grief turned into suspicion. Pain turned into quiet determination. As she walked back toward her car, she noticed a black vehicle parked at the far end of the road. Its windows were tinted, and the engine was still running. She paused. The driver's seat window slowly rolled down, just an inch. Someone was inside. Watching her. Margaret's heart started to race. She tried to see the face, but it was too dark. Then, suddenly, the car's headlights flashed twice, like a signal, and the vehicle sped away, splashing water across the street. She stood there in the rain, frozen. Was it just someone from the funeral? Or someone who wanted her to see them? The questions piled up like thunderclouds in her head. When she finally reached home that evening, her small house felt emptier than ever. She set her purse down and took off her wet coat. The framed photos on the wall, all of Elena smiling, laughing, hugging her, seemed to watch her silently. She walked to her daughter's room and opened the door. It still smelled faintly of her perfume. On the nightstand sat a diary, half open. Margaret hesitated, then sat down and began to read. The entries were short, filled with simple lines, "Long day at work, David's been quiet lately, I miss Mom." But one line caught her attention. Written just a week before her death. "If something happens to me, it won't be an accident." Margaret's eyes widened. Her hands began to shake as she turned the next page, but it was blank. The rest of the diary was empty. Her phone buzzed again. This time, there was another message. "Do you really think accidents happen by chance?" Her hands went cold. She typed again, desperate, "Who are you? What do you know?" No answer. Just the sound of rain outside her window. She walked to the kitchen, trying to calm herself. Maybe it was someone playing a cruel joke. Maybe grief was making her imagine things. But as she poured herself a glass of water, she noticed muddy footprints leading from the back door to the hallway. Her blood turned to ice. She lived alone. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. She stood completely still, her breath caught in her chest. Slowly, she looked toward the dark hallway. "Hello?" she whispered. No response. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of a clock and the distant sound of rain. She took a few careful steps forward, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. The footprints stopped near Elena's room, right by the chair where the diary lay open. And on the page where she had stopped reading, someone had drawn a small symbol in black ink, a heart split down the middle. Margaret's mouth went dry. She backed away slowly, clutching the locket in her hand like a shield. Somewhere outside, a car engine roared to life again. She rushed to the window, but by the time she looked, the street was empty, only the reflection of lightning on the wet road. Her phone buzzed one last time that night. If you want the truth, go to where she died. Tonight. The message disappeared seconds later, as if erased by someone from the other side. Margaret stood frozen by the window, her heart torn between fear and the desperate need to know. She looked at her daughter's photo one more time. "I'm coming, Elena," she whispered through trembling lips. "I'll find out what they did to you." Outside, thunder cracked like a warning. But inside that broken heart, a storm much stronger was just beginning to rise. The rain had stopped by morning, but the world still looked gray. Margaret hadn't slept all night. She sat at her kitchen table with cold coffee, staring at the phone in her hand. The last message. If you want the truth, go to where she died. Tonight. Still glowed in her mind like a warning. She hadn't gone. Fear had kept her frozen. But now, in the quiet light of dawn, fear had turned into anger. She wanted answers. She opened her drawer and pulled out the small map the police had given her weeks ago. A red mark circled the spot on Highway 47, accident site. That was where they said her daughter's car had crashed into a tree. No witnesses. No cameras. No proof. Margaret stared at the mark until her eyes burned. Then, slowly, memories began to surface. It had been only 2 weeks before the accident when she last saw her daughter alive. Elena had come to visit for Sunday dinner. The weather had been warm, but she wore long sleeves. When she hugged her mother, Margaret felt her body tremble slightly. "Sweetheart," she'd asked softly, "are you okay? You've lost weight." "I'm fine, Mom," Elena had said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Work's been crazy." But her eyes had told another story, dark circles, nervous glances toward her phone, the kind of silence that hides something deep. David arrived later than usual that night. He came in smelling of expensive cologne, his shirt crisp, his smile too wide to be real. "Sorry, traffic," he had said, kissing Elena on the cheek. But she turned her head slightly away. Margaret noticed it. She noticed everything. During dinner, David talked about business, his new contracts, his upcoming trip to Miami. Elena sat quietly, pushing food around her plate. When Margaret tried to ask about her, David interrupted, laughing. "Elena worries too much," he said. "She needs to relax." Margaret smiled politely, but something inside her twisted. David's tone wasn't caring, it was controlling. After dinner, while David took a phone call outside, Margaret touched her daughter's hand. "Elena," she whispered, "you can tell me if something's wrong." Elena shook her head. "It's nothing, Mom." "Really?" But then a tear escaped down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, forcing another smile. "I'm just tired." Margaret wanted to press harder, but Elena stood up and went to wash the dishes. The conversation ended there. That night, after they left, Margaret stood at the window watching their car drive away. She felt something dark, a cold weight, settle in her chest. Days passed, and small things began to happen. A strange call late one night. No one spoke, just breathing. Then, 2 days later, Margaret saw Elena's photo on social media, her eyes puffy, her smile forced. The caption read, "Date night with my love." But the photo wasn't posted by Elena. It was posted by Sophie, the woman David had once introduced as his business partner. The comments below were filled with hearts and compliments. "Such a cute couple," one said. "Perfect together," another wrote. Margaret had felt sick to her stomach. That same night, Elena called. Her voice was trembling. "Mom, if anything ever happens to me, just remember, I love you." Those words had burned into Margaret's mind forever. Now, sitting alone in her kitchen, she replayed those moments again and again. She couldn't stay silent anymore. Margaret picked up her car keys and drove to the police station. The young officer at the front desk recognized her. "Mrs. Parker, I'm sorry for your loss," he said gently. She nodded stiffly. "I need to see the accident report again." He hesitated. "Ma'am, we already—" "I know what you said," she interrupted, "but I need to see it myself." The officer sighed and handed her a thin folder. Inside were photos of the wreck. The car was smashed beyond recognition. The official note read, "Driver lost control due to wet road. No signs of foul play." Margaret flipped through the pages until she found the photo of Elena's hand on the steering wheel. She leaned closer and froze. Her daughter's seatbelt wasn't fastened. Elena always wore her seatbelt. Always. Margaret looked up sharply. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "She would never drive without it." The officer shrugged. "Sometimes people forget." "No," she said firmly. "Not my daughter." Something deep inside her whispered, she didn't forget. Someone unbuckled it. That evening, Margaret sat in her car outside the house where Elena and David had lived. The blinds were closed, the driveway empty. She hadn't been there since the funeral. Taking a deep breath, she got out and walked to the door. To her surprise, the front door wasn't locked. It creaked open with a soft sound, like the house itself was sighing. Inside, everything looked untouched, furniture neat, dishes stacked, candles on the table. But there was something cold about the air, like the life had been sucked out of it. She walked slowly through the living room, her hand brushing over framed wedding photos on the wall. In every picture, Elena smiled brightly. David stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. But now, looking closer, Margaret saw it, his smile never reached his eyes. She stepped into the bedroom. The sheets were still crumpled, as if someone had left in a hurry. On the nightstand was a phone charger and a small piece of torn paper. Margaret picked it up. It was part of a receipt from a hotel. The name printed at the top made her stomach turn. Sapphire Inn, room 204. That wasn't far from town. She put the receipt in her purse. Then, just as she turned to leave, her eyes caught something on the mirror, a faint lipstick mark and 2 words written in the corner with a shaky hand. "Help me." Her breath caught. She touched the glass, her fingers trembling. Suddenly, a sound came from the hallway, footsteps. She froze. "Hello?" she whispered. Silence. Her heart pounded as she stepped back. Maybe it was her imagination. Maybe she was hearing things. Then, from the living room, the front door clicked shut. Someone was in the house. Margaret's pulse raced. She ducked behind the bedroom door, clutching her purse. She could hear soft breathing, close, too close. The floor creaked once, then again. A shadow passed by the crack in the door. Margaret held her breath. Whoever it was stopped for a moment, then the sound of the door opening again. The footsteps faded away. When she finally dared to look out, the house was empty. But something had changed, the mirror was clean. The words were gone. Only the faint smell of David's cologne lingered in the air. Later that night, Margaret sat in her car outside the Sapphire Inn. Neon lights flickered across puddles on the ground. She watched people come and go through the glass doors, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she expected to find, but she knew this place held answers. She walked inside. The man at the front desk looked up from his computer. "Good evening, ma'am. Need a room?" "No," she said. "I just wanted to ask, did a David Parker stay here recently?" "Room 204? The man frowned. "I'm sorry, we can't give out guest information." Margaret leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I'm his mother-in-law. My daughter died 2 weeks ago." The man's expression softened. He checked the computer quickly. "Yes, ma'am. He was here. Checked in with a woman. Sophie Lane." Margaret's stomach twisted. "Do you know when?" "Same night your daughter's accident was reported." Her breath hitched. "What time did they leave?" He shook his head. "Don't know, ma'am. But they seemed upset when they arrived. Arguing, actually." "Arguing?" "Yes. I heard her crying." He yelled something about her finding out. Margaret felt dizzy. Her knees almost gave out. She thanked the man and hurried outside. The night air felt heavy. Her mind was spinning. Her finding out. Who? Elena? Did she find out about the affair? Or something worse? Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "You're getting closer. But the truth will cost you everything." She froze on the sidewalk, her heart thudding. The next morning, Margaret decided to visit someone who might know more. Ryan, Elena's coworker who had spoken to her at the funeral. She found his address through Elena's old text messages. Ryan lived in a small apartment downtown. When he opened the door, he looked surprised but not shocked. "I thought you might come," he said quietly. Inside, his living room was filled with computer parts and papers. He seemed nervous, glancing at the window every few seconds. "Ryan," Margaret began, "you said at the funeral you knew something. Please, tell me." He hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Elena trusted me," he said. "She found something at the company, something about David." Margaret frowned. "What do you mean?" "Money," Ryan whispered. "He was stealing from clients." She found proof: emails, files. She wanted to confront him. "I told her to be careful." Margaret's heart pounded. "And then?" "She said she'd record their talk that night. She promised to send me the file." He looked away. "She never did." Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. "So you think David?" "I don't think," Ryan said softly. "I know." He opened a drawer and pulled out a small USB drive. "I managed to recover one of her deleted recordings. But there's more I can't access yet. Someone tried to erase everything." Margaret took the USB with shaking hands. "Can you play it?" Ryan nodded, connecting it to his laptop. A faint audio filled the room. Elena's voice, trembling but brave. "David, I know what you've done. You're lying to everyone. I can't keep quiet anymore." Then a man's voice, cold and angry. "You don't know what you're talking about." The sound of glass breaking. A door slamming. Then silence. Margaret covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Ryan turned off the recording. "There's more, but it's damaged," he said. She looked at him with horror and determination. "I want the truth. All of it." He nodded. "Then be careful. He's not done yet." Margaret frowned. "What do you mean?" Ryan lowered his voice. "Someone's been watching me too." Thunder rumbled outside, as if echoing his words. Margaret looked out the window. Across the street, a black car was parked again. The same one from the cemetery. Its headlights flickered once. And Margaret knew this wasn't over. Sophie Lane sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her mascara had smudged under her eyes, and her lipstick was faded. She looked nothing like the confident woman she once was. The air in the room felt heavy, full of perfume and silence. Outside, cars passed on the wet street, their lights sliding across the curtains like ghosts. David was pacing near the window, his phone pressed tightly against his ear. "I told you to handle it," he hissed into the receiver. His voice was sharp, angry, and low. Sophie couldn't hear the other person, but she could see his jaw clench harder with every word. Finally, he threw the phone onto the chair. "They're saying it was an accident," he muttered. "Good. Let it stay that way." Sophie swallowed hard. "David, it doesn't feel right." He turned toward her. "What doesn't?" "Elena," she said softly. "She's dead, David." "She was your wife." His eyes narrowed. "She was my wife." "Don't start, Sophie. You knew what this was." Sophie looked down. Her hands were shaking. When she had first met David, she thought he was charming, successful, kind. He made her feel special, like she was the only woman who really understood him. But that illusion had started to fall apart months ago, piece by piece. Now, sitting in a hotel room with the sound of rain and guilt pressing on her chest, she felt trapped. David poured himself a drink and sat on the couch. "We'll leave for Miami in the morning," he said flatly. "I just need a break from this place." Sophie stared at him in disbelief. "You're leaving, the day of her funeral?" He shot her a cold look. "Don't make this about guilt, Sophie. I told you, it's done. She's gone. I can't fix the past." She wanted to argue, but his tone froze her. There was something in his eyes, a darkness, something unspoken, that made her skin crawl. She stood quietly and walked into the bathroom, closing the door behind her. Inside, she splashed cold water on her face and leaned over the sink, breathing hard. She looked at her reflection again and whispered to herself, "What have you done?" Her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up. A new message had appeared from an unknown number. "You took what wasn't yours." Her heart skipped a beat. She typed quickly, "Who is this?" No reply. She walked back into the room, trying to stay calm. David was already lying on the bed, his arm over his face. "Turn off the light," he muttered. "I need to sleep." Sophie turned the lamp off and lay beside him, her eyes wide open in the dark. Every sound, the dripping faucet, the hum of the air conditioner, made her jump. At some point, she must have drifted off, because when she woke up, the room was cold and dim. The curtains moved slightly though the window was shut. David was gone. His suitcase, too. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "You can't run from what you did." Sophie's blood ran cold. She looked around the room, her breath coming fast. The closet door was slightly open. Slowly, she reached for it and pulled it wider. Inside, hanging on a hook, was a photograph. It was a picture of Elena, smiling, standing in front of her car. On the back, written in red marker, were the words, "She knows." Sophie dropped the photo. Her hands shook as she backed away. She grabbed her purse and ran out of the hotel room, her heels clicking loudly on the floor. Outside, the night air was thick and warm. She ran to her car, started the engine, and sped away without looking back. But as she reached the main road, her headlights caught something, a figure standing by the trees. It was a woman, her hair long and wet from the rain. She wore a pale dress that clung to her skin. Sophie slammed on the brakes. The figure stood still in the middle of the road, head tilted slightly to one side. For a second, Sophie couldn't breathe. "Elena?" she whispered. The woman didn't move. Then, slowly, she raised her hand and pointed straight at Sophie. The car engine sputtered. The lights flickered. And when Sophie blinked, the road was empty. Her chest tightened as she tried to breathe. No, 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 she whispered. She drove away as fast as she could, her heart racing so hard she thought it might stop. By the time she reached her apartment, she was shaking all over. She locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and sank to the floor. She couldn't stop thinking about the figure on the road, the eyes, the hair, the silence. She told herself it was a dream, a trick of light. But deep down, she knew what she saw. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elena's face. Not the happy face from before, but the pale, lifeless one from the funeral photos she had secretly seen online. At around 3 a.m., her phone buzzed again. She almost didn't look, but curiosity and fear made her pick it up. This time, there was a video. It was grainy and dark. The camera shook as if someone was walking. The sound of heavy breathing filled the speakers. Then, through the shadows, a car appeared, Elena's car. The headlights were smashed, the front crumpled against a tree. Someone was filming the crash site. The camera moved closer until it stopped on a broken necklace lying in the dirt. Sophie's eyes widened. She recognized that necklace. She had seen it before, on David's nightstand. Her hands trembled as she dropped the phone. The video stopped. The screen went black. Suddenly, the phone rang. The caller ID showed no number. Just the word, unknown. She hesitated, then answered. Hello? For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then a woman's voice, soft, broken, and full of sadness, whispered. Why did you let him do it? Sophie screamed and threw the phone across the room. When she turned on the lights, the mirror above her dresser was fogged, as if someone had breathed on it. Slowly, words began to appear in the condensation. She knows. Sophie backed away until her legs hit the bed. She grabbed her purse, her keys, her phone, anything she could reach, and ran out of the apartment. In the hallway, the lights flickered. The elevator door opened on its own, even though no one pressed the button. She took the stairs instead, rushing down barefoot, her shoes clutched in her hands. When she reached the parking lot, she saw a familiar black car parked under the streetlight. The same one Margaret had seen. The driver's door opened. David stepped out, his face pale and tired. Sophie, he called. What are you doing here? She froze. Where did you go? He asked, walking toward her. You look terrified. David, she stammered, I got a message. Someone knows about Elena. They sent me a video. He cut her off sharply. Give me the phone. What? Give it to me, he shouted, grabbing her arm. His eyes were wild now, his voice filled with panic. Who sent it? Sophie pulled away, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know. I swear I don't know. David looked around the dark parking lot, breathing hard. Then he whispered, almost to himself, they're trying to ruin me. Sophie's phone buzzed again. She looked down. A new message flashed on the screen. He's lying to you. He killed her. David saw it. His face went white. He snatched the phone, read the message, and threw it onto the ground, smashing it under his shoe. Don't believe this, he shouted. It's all lies. Sophie stepped back, shaking her head. David, what did you do? His jaw tightened. Get in the car. No. He took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. I said get in the car, Sophie. She could see it now, the fear, the desperation, the guilt written across his face. And for the first time, she truly saw the man behind the charm, the man who could destroy everything and feel nothing. She turned and ran. Her footsteps echoed through the parking lot as David shouted her name. But she didn't look back. She just kept running, praying she'd never have to see him again. Behind her, David stood in the dark, his phone ringing again. He picked it up slowly. A voice on the other end whispered. It's time she knew the truth. David's face went still. He turned toward the shadows, and for a moment he thought he saw her. Elena. Standing by the trees, watching him. But when he blinked, she was gone. The house was quiet that night, too quiet for Margaret to sleep. She sat in her living room, staring at the photo of her daughter, Elena. The candle on the table flickered softly, casting long shadows on the walls. The air felt cold even though the heater was on. It had been days since the funeral, but the pain still sat in her chest like a stone. Every corner of the house reminded her of Elena, the soft laugh that once filled the kitchen, the shoes she used to leave near the door, the half-read book still lying on her nightstand. Margaret had cleaned the room, but she couldn't bring herself to move that book. It felt like if she did, Elena would disappear completely. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was late, almost midnight. She frowned, wondering who would message her at that hour. The screen lit up. Unknown number. She hesitated, her hand trembling slightly as she opened the message. Ask him about the motel. Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the words, confused and afraid. Ask who? What motel? Another message appeared seconds later. Your daughter didn't die in that car. Margaret felt the room spin. Her hands went cold. She looked around the empty living room, half expecting someone to be standing there, watching her. No, she whispered. That's not possible. She tried calling the number, but it didn't connect. The line went dead every time. She sat back down, her mind racing. The police report had said it was a car accident. Elena's car had gone off the road near the cliffs. It made sense, it was raining that night, the road was slippery. But something about it had always bothered her. Why had Elena been driving alone so late? And why had her phone been missing when they found the car? Margaret grabbed the photo album from the shelf. Inside, there was a picture of Elena and David taken a few weeks before her death. They were smiling, but Margaret could see it now, the tension in her daughter's eyes, the way her smile didn't quite reach her face. She whispered to the photo, "What were you hiding, my child?" Then she noticed something. In the corner of the photo, behind them, was a sign, Hillcrest Motel. Margaret's eyes widened. That name. The motel. She stood up, grabbed her keys, and without another thought, she left the house. The streets were empty as she drove through the night. The rain had started again, tapping softly on the windshield. She followed the old road that led out of town, her headlights cutting through the mist. After about 20 minutes, she saw it, a small, run-down building with a faded sign, Hillcrest Motel. The parking lot was empty except for one old car parked near the back. The neon light above the office flickered weakly. Margaret stepped out of her car, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. The air smelled of wet asphalt and something else, old cigarettes, maybe. Inside the office, an elderly man sat behind the counter, half asleep. He looked up when the bell above the door rang. Checking in, ma'am? He asked with a tired smile. No, Margaret said quietly. I'm looking for someone. My daughter stayed here. Her name was Elena Lane. The man frowned and rubbed his chin. Elena Lane, he turned to the old logbook beside him and flipped through the pages. Yes, I remember her. Pretty young woman. Booked a room about 2 weeks before her accident. Margaret's heart dropped. 2 weeks? Are you sure? Positive, he said. She wasn't alone either. There was a man with her. I think his name was David. Margaret felt a chill run through her entire body. "Do you remember which room?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Room 12, the man said. "But it's empty now." She thanked him and walked down the corridor. The hallway smelled of dust and rain. The carpet was old, the wallpaper peeling. When she reached room 12, she hesitated. The door was slightly open. She pushed it gently, and it creaked. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. The faint smell of perfume still lingered, a smell she recognized. Elena's. Her hand trembled as she turned on the light. There wasn't much inside, just a bed, a broken lamp, and a small table near the window. But something caught her eye. On the floor, near the corner of the bed, lay a silver bracelet. Margaret knelt down and picked it up. It was Elena's. She had given it to her on her 25th birthday. Tears filled her eyes. "Oh, my baby." Suddenly, a noise behind her made her freeze. The floor creaked, slow and deliberate. She turned quickly, but no one was there. Her heart pounded in her chest. She was about to leave when she noticed something else, a small, folded piece of paper tucked behind the nightstand. She pulled it out carefully. It was a receipt from the night before Elena's death. 2 names were written on it, Elena Lane and Sophie Carter. Margaret's breath caught. Sophie? She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to understand. What was Sophie doing here with her daughter? Did she know what had happened? Before she could think further, her phone buzzed again. It was another message from the same unknown number. "She tried to tell you. Check the drawer." Margaret looked at the bedside drawer. Her fingers shook as she pulled it open. Inside was an old mobile phone, dusty and cracked. It wasn't hers, it was Elena's. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God." She turned it on, praying it would still work. The screen flickered to life. There were several messages in the inbox, most unread. The last one was sent at 11:47 p.m. on the night Elena died. It was addressed to Mom. "Mom, if anything happens to me, promise me you'll tell the truth. He's not who you think he is." Margaret covered her mouth, her tears falling fast. Her daughter had tried to warn her, and she hadn't been there to help. The phone slipped from her hand as she sobbed quietly. Then she noticed one more message. It wasn't from Elena, it was received after that final text. "You should have stayed quiet." The sender's name flashed on the screen. David. Margaret's eyes widened in horror. The truth was finally coming into focus, and it was darker than she ever imagined. She stood, clutching the phone tightly, her breathing uneven. As she turned toward the door, she heard a faint knock. Once. Then again. She froze. "Who's there?" No answer. She took a step closer, and suddenly the door swung open with a loud bang. The hallway was empty, only the sound of rain filled the air. But then, faintly, she heard it, a whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "He's coming." Margaret backed into the room, holding the phone to her chest. The light flickered once, twice, and went out completely. In the darkness, she could still feel the cold metal of her daughter's bracelet in her hand, and the words of that final message echoing in her mind. "He's not who you think he is." The drive back from the motel felt endless. Margaret's fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The rain was falling harder now, hitting the windshield like small stones. Her mind was spinning, the messages, the receipt, the phone. Everything she had just seen made her chest tighten with fear. Her daughter hadn't died in an accident. Someone had made sure she never came home that night. And that someone was David. Margaret wiped her eyes, trying to steady herself. Every memory of David came rushing back, his polite smile at family dinners, the way he called her mom, his empty seat at the funeral. It all made sense now. He hadn't stayed away because he was heartbroken. He had stayed away because he was hiding something. When she reached home, the house felt darker than usual. She locked the door behind her, her clothes still wet from the rain. The sound of thunder rolled in the distance. She sat at the kitchen table and placed Elena's old phone in front of her. The screen was cracked, but the messages were still there, her daughter's last words. "Mom, if anything happens to me, promise me you'll tell the truth. He's not who you think he is." Margaret took a deep breath and whispered, "I promise, baby." Then, she picked up her own phone and dialed David's number. He answered after 2 rings. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Margaret. You need to come over," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to talk." There was silence for a few seconds. Then he said, "About what?" "You know what," she replied. A long pause followed, then a quiet sigh. "All right. I'll be there soon." Margaret hung up and placed the phone down. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. Part of her was afraid of what he might say, or what he might do. But another part of her, the part that had loved and lost her daughter, was ready. 15 minutes later, headlights appeared outside the house. The sound of tires crunching on gravel made her flinch. David stepped out of the car, wearing a black coat. His face was expressionless, his eyes hidden in shadow. Margaret opened the door before he could knock. "Come in." He walked inside slowly, glancing around. "You've been digging, haven't you?" he said quietly. Margaret's hands shook, but she didn't back down. "Why, David? Why did you do it?" He gave a small smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Do what?" She slammed Elena's phone onto the table. "Don't play games with me. You sent her that message, you should have stayed quiet. You were with her that night at the motel." "I found the receipt, David. I found everything." His jaw tightened. He looked at the phone, then back at her. "You shouldn't have gone there." "Then tell me the truth," she demanded, her voice cracking. "What happened to my daughter?" David exhaled slowly and sat down at the table. For a long time, he didn't speak. The only sound was the rain outside and the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, he said, "She found out." Margaret frowned. "Found out what?" "About me. About Sophie." He looked down at his hands. "She wasn't supposed to be there that night. I went to the motel to end things with Sophie, I swear I did. But Elena showed up. She'd followed me." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She just wanted answers. "I tried to explain," David said, his voice trembling now. "But she wouldn't listen. She was angry, she said she was going to the police, that she would tell everyone what I'd done." Margaret's heart pounded. "What did you do, David?" He stared at her, his eyes cold again. "Money. I borrowed from people I shouldn't have. I used her name, her accounts, to cover it up. She found the papers in my drawer. That's when everything fell apart." Margaret took a step back, covering her mouth. "You used my daughter?" "She was going to destroy everything," he said harshly. "My job, my life, everything I built. I just wanted to talk, to make her understand. But she wouldn't stop yelling. She ran out of the motel, it was raining. I followed her." His voice broke for the first time. "She slipped near the car. I tried to catch her. I did. But..." Margaret's knees went weak. "You let her fall." "She hit her head on the rock," David whispered. "It was an accident. I didn't mean for it to happen." Margaret shook her head. "You didn't call for help." He closed his eyes. "No. I panicked. Sophie came back. She saw it too. We pushed the car off the road to make it look like she crashed. The room went silent. The sound of thunder filled the air again. Margaret stared at him in disbelief. You killed her, she said softly. David looked up at her, his eyes filled with guilt. I didn't mean to, Margaret. You have to believe me. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. She stepped back, shaking. Don't you dare call me by my name. He stood up, reaching out to her. Please. If this gets out, I'll lose everything. You'll lose, too. You think people won't talk? They'll drag Elena's name through the mud. They'll say she cheated, that she ran off. Is that what you want? Margaret looked at him with fire in her eyes. You already took everything from me, David. You took my daughter, my peace, my sleep. I have nothing left to lose. His face hardened. Then maybe you shouldn't have found that phone. Before she could react, he grabbed her wrist, his grip tight. Give it to me, he hissed. Now. Let go, she cried, trying to pull away. The struggle was short but fierce. The phone fell to the floor, sliding under the table. Margaret pushed him back with all her strength. He stumbled, hitting the edge of the counter. For a second, everything went still. Both of them were breathing heavily. Then, from the dark hallway behind them, came the sound of a soft ring, Elena's old phone, still on the table. David froze. The screen lit up with a notification. One new message. She's watching. David stared at it, his face pale. What is this? Margaret picked up the phone, her hand shaking. You tell me. The message appeared again, repeating itself over and over, the same 3 words. She's watching. She's watching. She's watching. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The candle on the table blew out, even though the windows were shut. David stepped back, his eyes wide. What's happening? A cold wind moved through the room. Margaret could feel it brush her hair, though the door was closed. Then she heard it, a faint whisper near her ear. Mom! She froze. The voice was soft, broken, but familiar. David's breathing grew faster. Stop it! Stop it, he shouted into the empty air. You're dead. You're dead, do you hear me? The photo frame on the wall fell to the ground with a loud crash. Glass shattered across the floor. Margaret stared at the picture. It was Elena's portrait, the one from her graduation. The glass had cracked straight across her face. David backed away, trembling. She's not real, he muttered. She's not real. But Margaret wasn't so sure anymore. The air was cold, the lights flickered again, and somewhere in the dark corner of the room, she thought she saw movement, a figure, faint and still, standing just beyond the light. David turned, and his voice broke into a whisper. Elena! But before he could move, the phone on the table rang again, loud, sharp, and echoing through the room. Neither of them dared to answer. The room stayed dark for a long time after the phone stopped ringing. Margaret stood frozen, her hands still trembling. David was breathing hard, his face pale like all the color had drained from him. The silence felt alive, heavy and thick, like the air before a storm. Then the phone lit up again on its own. The same message appeared, one more time. She's watching. Margaret took a step closer. The screen suddenly went black, and before she could react, the house lights flickered on and off, once, twice, then stayed dim. David turned toward her, his voice low and unsteady. I didn't mean for any of this, Margaret. You have to believe me. She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the photo frame on the floor, the one that had fallen. The crack across Elena's face now looked almost like a tear. She bent down to pick it up, but when she did, she saw something strange. Under the broken glass, written faintly across the wooden back of the frame, were the words. Room 12 wasn't the end. Her heart skipped a beat. She whispered, "What does that mean?" David took a step forward, his voice shaking. "Stop, please. You don't understand. She's gone." But even as he said the words, they both heard it, a sound from the hallway. Slow footsteps. One step. Then another. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. David turned toward the sound, his eyes wide. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped right outside the kitchen door. Margaret reached for the light switch, but before she could touch it, the bulbs went out completely, leaving them in total darkness. David cursed under his breath and grabbed his phone for light. The flashlight beam trembled as he pointed it toward the hallway. "There's no one there," he said, trying to sound calm. But then, something cold brushed past his shoulder. He flinched and dropped the phone. The light spun across the floor, and for a brief second, the beam caught something in the corner. A woman's reflection. Pale. Still. Her eyes staring straight ahead. Then the light went out. Margaret screamed. "Elena!" The room filled with the sound of breaking glass as one of the windows cracked from the inside. The wind howled through the gap, carrying a faint, familiar scent, the same perfume Elena used to wear. David stumbled backward, his voice cracking. "This isn't real. She's dead. She's..." But before he could finish, Elena's old phone, the one on the table, lit up once more. This time, instead of a text, there was a video notification. Margaret hesitated, then pressed play. The video showed the motel room. The same one she had been in earlier. The camera was shaking, as if someone was holding it while breathing heavily. Elena's voice came through, quiet, frightened. "If something happens to me, please know I tried to tell the truth." David froze. His hands were shaking now. "Turn it off," he said. "Please, turn it off." Margaret ignored him. The video continued. Elena's face appeared on screen, her eyes red from crying. "He's not the man you think he is, Mom. If you're watching this, it means I couldn't get away." The video cut suddenly to darkness. Then, faintly, the sound of a door opening. A man's voice, David's voice, said, "Elena, wait." Margaret's stomach turned. The sound of a struggle followed. A scream. Then silence. The screen went black. Margaret looked up slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with tears. "You killed her," she said softly. David shook his head violently. "No, I didn't. That's not how it happened." He backed away, his breath quick and uneven. "It was an accident. She fell." "She didn't fall," Margaret interrupted, her voice firm now. "You pushed her." David opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a loud bang echoed through the house. The front door had slammed shut on its own. They both turned toward the sound. And then came another noise, the slow creak of the staircase. Margaret whispered, "There's someone upstairs." David looked terrified. "No one lives upstairs anymore." But the creaking continued, step by step, as if someone was walking down the old wooden stairs. The air grew colder. Margaret could see her breath now, white against the dim light. Then, at the bottom of the stairs, a faint glow appeared, soft and white, almost like a mist. The shape of a woman began to form. Her hair was long, her dress pale and wet, her eyes filled with sorrow. David took a step back, his voice barely audible. "Elena?" The figure moved closer, her bare feet leaving no sound on the floor. Her head tilted slightly to the side, and she raised one hand, pointing straight at David. David fell to his knees, shaking. "Please, please, I'm sorry." Margaret stood frozen, her tears falling freely. Elena, she whispered. My sweet girl. The lights flickered again. The photo frames on the wall rattled. Then, in a voice that was both soft and echoing, like it came from everywhere at once, Elena spoke. He lied to you, Mom. He took everything from me. David covered his ears. Stop! Stop, please! Margaret's voice was trembling. Tell me, Elena, tell me what to do. The ghost's expression softened. She looked at her mother for a long moment, then pointed toward David again. Her lips moved silently, but Margaret could read the words. Justice. The lights went out completely. David screamed. When the power came back a few seconds later, he was gone. The front door was wide open, the rain pouring in from outside. Margaret ran to the doorway, calling his name, but there was no answer, only the sound of thunder rolling across the sky. Far down the road, through the storm, she saw a single pair of headlights speeding away into the night. She stood there in the rain, clutching the photo frame to her chest. The perfume scent still hung in the air, faint but real. Elena was gone again. But this time, Margaret knew she wasn't at peace. Not yet. She looked down at the old phone, still glowing faintly in her hand. A new message had appeared. He can't hide anymore. Margaret whispered into the wind, I'll find him, my child. I promise you. Somewhere far away, David's car raced down the highway, his eyes wild with fear. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see flashing lights or headlights behind him. But instead, he saw something else. For just a second, the reflection in the mirror wasn't his own. It was Elena's. The rain came down in sheets as David's car sped down the lonely highway. Wipers struggled to clear the windshield, the storm hammering the roof like angry fists. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his eyes darting from the road to the mirror every few seconds. Every time he looked, he saw it, her face. Elena's pale reflection staring back at him from the backseat. He blinked hard, shaking his head. No, it's not real. But when he looked again, she was still there. Please, he whispered, his voice trembling. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. The headlights flickered. The car engine made a strange noise, a sputter, then silence. The car began to slow. He hit the gas again, but the pedal sank with no response. The car rolled to a stop on the side of the road. David slammed his fists against the wheel. No! Not now! Lightning flashed, lighting up the road for a brief second. And there, just beyond the rain, stood a woman. Soaked. Motionless. Watching him. He froze, his breath caught in his throat. Elena! The figure didn't move. He tried to start the engine again, his hands shaking. The car wouldn't start. The battery light blinked red. Then, without warning, the radio crackled to life, static, then a faint voice. You left me there. David's heart raced. He slammed his hand against the radio. Stop it! Stop! The voice grew louder, distorted but clear enough to hear. You walked away. You didn't even look back. He grabbed his jacket, pushed the door open, and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit him instantly, soaking through his clothes. The woman was gone. The road was empty again. Get a grip, he muttered. It's just your guilt. That's all it is. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Across town, Margaret sat in her car, the broken phone on the passenger seat. The message on the screen still glowed faintly, he can't hide anymore. She gripped the steering wheel tightly. I'll find him, she whispered. Her heart felt heavy but steady. She had cried enough. Now there was only one thing left, truth. She drove through the storm, following the same road where David had fled. Every mile felt longer, the thunder louder. She didn't care about the danger anymore. Her daughter deserved peace. Back on the roadside, David stumbled toward a small wooden sign half covered in mud. It read, "Maple Bridge, 1 mile ahead." He remembered the bridge. He and Elena had stopped there once, years ago, when things were still good. They had laughed, talked, made promises. And that night, the night she died, he had gone there again. He felt his chest tighten. "No," he said to himself. "Don't think about it." But as he walked, he heard footsteps behind him, soft, steady, matching his pace. He turned. No one. He began to walk faster, his shoes splashing through puddles. The footsteps followed, faster too. "Leave me alone," he shouted into the darkness. "Please, Elena. What do you want from me?" The answer came in the wind. The truth. David stopped. His hands were shaking. The rain softened, and for a moment, the night felt almost calm. Then he saw the bridge ahead, old, wooden, and half covered in fog. He stepped onto it slowly, the wood creaking beneath his feet. The river below was wild with rainwater, roaring and cold. Halfway across, he froze. There she was again. Standing at the other end of the bridge. Elena. Her hair was wet, her dress torn, her eyes filled with sadness, and something else. Power. He fell to his knees. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." Her voice was soft, carried by the wind. "You didn't just hurt me. You left me." David shook his head, tears mixing with the rain. "It was an accident. You fell. You pushed me." He covered his face. No, I didn't." But the memory came rushing back, her screaming, his hand on her arm, the slippery edge, her terrified eyes. Then the fall. The sound of her body hitting the rocks below. And his silence. He had walked away that night, leaving her there. Now she stood before him again, as if time had folded back on itself. Margaret's car pulled up at the edge of the bridge. She could barely see through the rain, but the sight ahead made her heart stop. David was kneeling in the middle of the bridge, shouting into the night. And in front of him, through the mist, she saw her daughter's form, glowing faintly in the storm. "Elena," she whispered. She stepped out of the car and ran forward. The wind fought her every step, but she didn't stop. "David," she screamed. "What have you done?" David turned, his face twisted in fear. "She won't stop. She won't forgive me." The bridge shook under the weight of the storm. Boards began to crack. Margaret reached them, breathless. She looked at Elena's spirit, her daughter's beautiful face, calm now, but sad. "Please, let her rest," she cried. "Let me help her." Elena's ghost turned toward her mother, eyes softening. For a moment, the storm seemed to quiet. She whispered one last word. "Goodbye." And then, in a blinding flash of light, she disappeared. David screamed as the bridge cracked beneath him. He grabbed the railing, slipping, his foot breaking through a loose board. Margaret reached out. "David! Give me your hand." He looked at her, eyes full of guilt. "I'm sorry. I don't deserve to live." Before she could reach him, the railing gave way. He fell. The splash echoed through the valley, swallowed by thunder. Margaret collapsed to her knees, tears mixing with the rain. "Elena, it's over now," she whispered. The storm slowly began to fade. The first light of dawn broke through the clouds. And for a brief second, Margaret felt something warm on her shoulder, a gentle touch, comforting and light. When she turned, there was no one there. But the pain in her chest didn't feel as heavy anymore. Far below, the river carried away the last trace of David. His phone floated briefly before sinking, the screen flashing one last time. "The truth has been seen." And with that, the night was finally still. The storm had passed. The sky was still gray, but the first touch of dawn painted soft light over the soaked earth. The river below the old bridge had quieted, its wild rage now a slow, endless flow. Margaret stood there for a long time. Her clothes were drenched, her hair sticking to her face, but she didn't care. She just stared into the water, where David had fallen. The police arrived later that morning. They found no body, only the broken railing, the wrecked bridge, and pieces of shattered wood. The officers told her it might take days before they found him. She didn't answer. Deep down, she already knew. David was gone, just like Elena. Days turned into weeks. The house that once felt empty now felt silent in a different way, calmer, peaceful. Elena's photo sat on the table again, no cracks this time. The frame had been fixed, the glass replaced. Margaret lit a candle beside it every night. Sometimes, when the flame flickered for no reason, she smiled. "Good night, my love," she would whisper. But the silence wasn't total. Sometimes, faintly, she still heard soft footsteps upstairs, the same rhythm Elena had when she used to come down for breakfast. It didn't scare her anymore. It comforted her. Elena wasn't haunting her now. She was protecting her. One morning, while cleaning, Margaret found something strange in the drawer of David's old desk. An envelope. It was sealed, with her name written in his handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter, old, wrinkled, the ink faded but still readable. "Margaret. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, I'm already gone. I never meant for any of it to happen. Elena found out about the affair, and I lost control. She said she was leaving me, said she would tell you everything. I begged her to stop, but she wouldn't listen. I grabbed her arm to make her stay. She slipped. She fell. I didn't push her, but I didn't save her either. I stood there and watched her fall. I told myself it was an accident, but the truth is, it was my fault, because of the lies, the betrayal, the anger. I loved her, Margaret. Not as a daughter, but as the only person who ever looked at me and saw hope. I destroyed that. I see her every night now. I hear her voice. Maybe she's waiting for me. Maybe she'll forgive me when I see her again. I'm sorry. David." Margaret's tears fell silently on the paper. Her chest felt tight, but her eyes no longer burned with rage. Only sadness. And release. She folded the letter gently and placed it under Elena's photo. "It's over now," she whispered. "You can rest, sweetheart." The wind moved through the open window, brushing against the curtains. The candle beside the photo flickered once, then steadied. A soft scent filled the room, the familiar fragrance of Elena's perfume. It lingered for a moment, as if the air itself wanted to say goodbye. That evening, Margaret sat outside on the porch, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with soft pink and gold, peaceful and warm. She closed her eyes and smiled faintly. Somewhere deep in her heart, she felt a presence, gentle and calm. Elena wasn't gone. She was finally free. Then, just as the sun dipped below the trees, her phone buzzed. She looked at it, expecting nothing unusual. But when she saw the message, her breath caught. "Unknown number, thank you, Mom." She stared at the screen, tears welling up again. The message disappeared after a few seconds, vanishing like it had never been there. But Margaret didn't need proof. She knew. Her daughter had found peace. As the night fell, the house remained quiet and still. The candlelight glowed softly against the photo frame. The shadows danced across Elena's smiling face. Outside, the river whispered under the moonlight, not angry anymore, but gentle, almost like a lullaby. And from far beyond the sound of the water, faint and distant, came the voice of a girl, soft, sweet, and free at last. "I'm home, Mom."